Makomos ksiv, but 1 second, the pasuk says makomos, speaking about places. Im eino inyan the makomos, the little mystery. But again, remember, spaces mean geographic spaces can't become usher. Right? The ksiv Eloheim ala harim v'lo harim Eloheim, because the pasuk quotes about their gods on the mountains, telling us that the gods could be on the mountains, but the mountains can't become gods. We'll say top of Nun Beis Amud Aleph, literally mamish beginning of the daf. Teneu inyan the kelim. Ultimately, again, apply the pasuk to utensils. Mikan amru. So we'll say from here we learn Avodas kochavim shel ovid kochavim eina asura ela ad shete aved. So we'll say from here we see that the avodas kochavim of an ovid kochavim ultimately again is not asur until it is worshipped. I will say, just by the way, you should understand that this machlokas actually could have dramatic halachic implications. Let's say again it happens to be I'd like to get into the cross business. Right, mamish. I heard it's very lucrative. Right, a lot of followers. I'd like to go ahead and get into the cross. Can a good Jewish boy go ahead and open up a cross business? Shabbos say, so again, just so you understand. Well, first, don't do it. And that's, I'm going to go on record as saying, find another profession. But at the end of the day, it's an interesting shaila. And what does it depend on? What it ultimately depends on is, at what point in time is the cross considered to be Avoda Zara? Is it Avoda Zara ultimately, again, from the time that it's made? Just, again, it's obviously a religious object made for the purpose, leaving aside whether or not Christianity is Avodah Zara, leaving that's a side question. But I will say, so can I do that? Buddha or whatever it is, can I mass produce these items? Because again, they're not worshipped yet, but they will be worshipped. I will say, this is the machlukes, Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel. At the end of the day, when does the Avodah Zara itself become asr? Is it at the time that it's made, or ultimately, again, is it only after it is worshipped? That's the fundamental dispute. It says, Rabbi Kiva holds that the Avodah Zara of an akum is only asr after it's worshipped, but the Avodah Zara of a Jew is asr immediately. Which is fascinating. Then Rabbi Akiva's model, the Avodah Zara of a Jew is treated more chamer than the Avodah Zara of an akum. Right? The Avodah Zara of a Jew is asr immediately upon it, once it's fashioned, even before it's worshipped. The Avodah Zara of an akum will only be asr after it's worshipped. One second. We just said before that the pasuk is speaking about utensils. So the Gemara says, Amar Kra, Asher atem yershim osam es Eloheim. Makish Eloheim lekelim. The pasuk goes ahead and equates their gods to utensils. Makilim ad sheyavdu. We'll say just like utensils used in the service of Avodah Zara are only asr once they are actively used. Af Eloheim nami ad sheyavdu. Ultimately, again, their gods, speaking by the akum, also only become asr after they worship them. So we'll say this is Shitas Rabbi Akiva, that the Avodas Kochavim, the idolatry of an akum, is only asr once he worships it, but the Avodah Zara of a Jew is asr immediately. But Rabbi Akiva the Makish Amar Lacha, Rabbi Akiva doesn't make this hakish. We'll say to you, SS Hifsika Inyan. So we'll say the word S ultimately again makes a distinction between their gods and ultimately the utensils. Rabbi Shmuel. So we'll say, watch this. So now we're gonna ping. This is actually very exciting. We're gonna ping pong a little bit back and forth between the shilos of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel. Ashkechan avodos kochavim shel ovid kochavim dein asura ad sheti aved. So in Rabbi Shmuel's model, we see that the Avodah Zara of an akum is only asr once it's worshipped. The Yisrael dasura miyad minale. Where does Rabbi Shmuel know that the Avodah Zara of a Jew is asr immediately? Svarahu. See, he says it's a svara. We'll say, what's the svara? Mida ovid kochavim ad shete aved. The Yisrael asura miyad. So the Gemara says the fact that an ovid kochavim is only going to be asr once he worships it. The Yisrael's Avodah Zara will be asr miyad. Ima the Yisrael klal lo. Why don't you say instead that maybe the Avodah Zara of the Yisrael never becomes asr at all? So the Gemara says that doesn't make sense. Hashta gniza baya itzuri lo misra. I will say if the Avodah Zara itself, remember what do you do with the Avodah Zara of a Jew? What do you do with the Avodah Zara of a Jew? It requires gniza. We'll say gniza means it has to be hidden away. All right, so we'll say this is very important. As opposed to the Avodah Zara of an akum, where what can you do with that Avodah Zara? What can you do with it? You can be mevatel it, right? Remember again, an akum could be mevatel his Avodah Zara. He could negate the idolatrous identity of his deity. A Yisrael cannot negate his Avodah Zara. He cannot negate his Avodah Zara. Therefore, the only thing you could do, you could destroy it, or you could do gniza. You could go ahead and simply hide it away. So the Gemara says, "Ve'ima kida ovid kochavim." Well, maybe again it should follow the same halacha as the ovid kochavim. Amar kra ve'es chatoschem asher asisem es ha'egel. Well, so listen to this. Where do we bring a raya from? We bring a raya from the golden calf, the egel. So just like what does the pasuk say? The sin that you committed in that you made the egel. What do you see from here? Mishas asiya kimle bechet. We both say, what do you see from here? You see from here that for a Jew, from the time that he fashions the Avoda Zara, even though he has not yet worshipped it, already it is aser. Already it is aser. Ema hanimili lemekam gavra bechet. So maybe that's only true to say that a person has violated the Avera once he goes ahead and he has made the Avoda Zara. But Isure lo mitzra, maybe the Avoda Zara itself doesn't become aser until it's actively worshipped. Amrkra arur ha'ish asher yasa pesal umasecha. Cursed is the person who makes a pesal and a masecha. What do you see from there? Mishas asiya kimle ba'arur. We'll say already from the time that you've made the object, already again a person is in a state of arur. So we'll say maybe that's only true to go ahead and establish the person as being arur, as being cursed. We'll say what the Gemara is suggesting over here is as follows. Maybe there's a distinction between personal violation. In other words, we'll say maybe there's a distinction over here between the cheftza and the gavra. Right? Maybe again, as soon as a Jew goes out and makes Avoda Zara, so there's an Isra on the Gavra, meaning he did something wrong. But the Cheftza, the idol itself, might not yet be prohibited. To which the Gemara says, Toevas Hashem Ksiv. Ultimately, again, it says it is an abomination for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which also indicates that immediately after the object is already made, it is already an abomination. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva will say, Davar HaMevi Lidei Toeva. That ultimately, again, such an object is called a Davar HaMevi Lidei Toeva. By the way, I realized I reversed the shitos before. Rabbi Akiva is of the opinion that the Avoda Zara of an Ovid Kochavim becomes Aser immediately. The Avoda Zara of a Jew only becomes Aser once he worships it. Rabbi Shmuel holds the Avoda Zara of a Jew becomes Aser immediately, and the Avoda Zara of an Akum only becomes Aser once he worships it. I saw some puzzled looks on your faces, and I'm sure it was because I reversed the shitos. So I just wanna clarify that. Good morning, everyone. Good. Okay, good. Okay, so let's go back to Rabbi Kiva. So what's Rabbi Kiva? Avodas kochav. And we'll say klal gadol in life is it's as exciting as you decide it's going to be. The excitement level of anything in life is never dependent on the actual experience. It is dependent on how you are mesiaches to the experience. Daf Nun Beis and Avoda Zara could be the next 42 minutes. No, we don't have 42 minutes. 32 minutes. Could be the most exciting 32 minutes of your life. It could be. They could be if you choose them to be. Samir Hashem, Ubacharta Bachayim will choose to make it exciting. Rabbi Akiva, Avodas Kocham Shavi Kocham Dasura Mina, Miyad Minale. So we'll say, Rabbi Akiva, where does he know that the Avodah Zara? We'll say, first wide line, Nun Beis Amud Aleph. Where does Rabbi Akiva know that the Avodah Zara of an Akum is Aser immediately, even without being worshipped? Where does he know that from? So the Gemara says, Amar Ulo, Amar Kra, Pesile Eloheim Tisrafun Ba'ish. Because also the Pasuk says, now literal translation is, the idols of their gods you shall burn in the fire. But Rabbi Akiva darshans, Mishep Haslu Naase Eloka. They will say ultimately again, Mishep Haslu ultimately means what? From the moment that they carve it out, like Psolacha, right? From the moment that they carve, from the moment that they make it, it's Aser. So the moment that the idol is made, even before it's worshipped, it's immediately Aser. V'idach, what does Rabbi Shmuel do with that? V'idach, ha'humi b'ayli lichiditani Rav Yosef. We'll say Rabbi Shmuel will say, no, we need that pasuk for something else. What do I need that pasuk for? The Tani Rav Yosef, minayin la'ovid kochavim, shepol sol eloko. We'll say, how do we know that an ovid kochavim has the ability to negate the idolatrous identity of his idol? We'll say, in other words, how do I know that an ovid kochavim has the ability to invalidate his idol? Where do I know that from? So the Gemara says, Shedemar psilei Eloheim tisrafun ba'ish. Because also the pasuk says you can passel your avodah zara. You can go ahead and you can negate it. You can go ahead and undo its idolatrous identity. V'idach, and where does Rabbi Akiva learn that out from? Nafkalei mid Shmuel. He learns it out ultimately again from Shmuel. What does Shmuel say? The Shmuel Rami Ksiv. I will say Shmuel contrasts two psukim. What does he contrast? Lo sachmod kesef v'zohav aleihem. The pasuk says you shall not covet the gold and the silver upon them. Uksiv v'lakachta lecha. But then it says, you shall take the gold and the silver upon them. So we'll say, so which one is it? Ha-ketzad. So we'll say, in other words, can I take the gold and the silver of Avoda Zara or not? And the answer is, it depends. Ha-ketzad. Paslo leloka lo sachmod. So we'll say, ultimately, again, if it was carved out for the idol, in other words, if it was set aside for the idol, you can't use it. But paslu me eloka. But if it was carved out from the idol, then what? Then ultimately, again, one is permitted to take it. So we'll say, so again, you see the ability to go ahead and negate the identity of the Avoda Zara. Ultimately, again, at that point in time, it ceases to be an Avoda Zara, and one is permitted to go ahead and benefit from it.
There's a car outside, the alarm keeps going off, a silver V6 Accord Coupe. Mine.
Okay, so the Gemara says as follows, Rabbi Akiva. Thank you. Rabbi Akiva, Ashkechan Avodas Kocham Sha'ovid Kochavim Da'asur Miyad. So says the Gemara, but one second, Rabbi Akiva, Ashkechan Avodas Kocham Sha'ovid Kocham Asur Miyad. The Israel Ashati Avim Miyad. I will say, where does Rabbi Akiva? So Rabbi Akiva, we've now proven, or at least he's proven from the pasuk, that what? That the Avodah Zara of an Ovid Kochavim becomes Asur immediately. But again, I will say, the Avodah Zara of the Yisrael, ultimately, how do we know that it's only Asr once you worship it? Rabbi Huda Amar Kra, V'sam Baseser. So I will say, the pasuk says, literally again, Arur Ha'isha Shayasa Pesel Masecha Tuavas Hashem Asei Di Charash, V'sam Baseser. We'll say, what does V'sam Baseser mean? V'sam Baseser, Ad She Asela Dvarim Shebaseser. That you are only, they will say that the idol is only Asr until you do those things in private. We'll say, what things in private are we referring to over here? So Rashi says, Dvarim Shebaseser, Avoda Shebaseser, Uvda Shloishno Bezim Isklo. We'll say, the assumption is this is the godless of a Jew. The godless of a Jew is if he's going to worship Avoda Zara. The assumption is, where is he worshiping Avoda Zara? Right? In private. So we'll say, you see, again, perhaps I'm going to do an Avera, but the one thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to do an Avera publicly. At least, again, if my private image is tarnished, I'm going to try to do whatever I can to preserve my public image. See, I will say, at the end of the day, see, people think that that's hypocritical. Such a hypocrite. I'm saying it's not hypocritical. I mean, it is hypocritical, but at the end of the day, it stems, I will say, from a place of Kiddusha, that a Jew never fully wants to lose his Kedusha. A Jew never wants to fully lose his standing. A Jew deep down knows what's right and what's wrong. See, even if I'm going to worship Avodah Zara, I'm not going to do it publicly. If I'm going to worship Avodah Zara, I'm going to go and do it. And it goes, we see this again, we all make mistakes, but at least we try to ensure that our mistakes are not public mistakes, that our mistakes are private mistakes, because again, deep down, we want the ability to reclaim the Kedusha that we've lost. V'idach, what does Rabbi Shmuel do with that? Ha'umi b'ayli l'chid Rabbi Yitzchak. No, Rabbi Yitzchak, minayin la'avodas kochavim shetun geniza. Rabbi Yitzchak says, we'll say, how do we know that the Avodah Zara of a Jew requires geniza, has to be hidden away? In other words, that we'll say that you can't be mevatel, the Avodah Zara of a Jew. Instead, it has to be hidden. Shene'emar v'sam baseser. You shall put it in a hidden place. V'idach, Rabbi Kiva will say, nafkele mit Rav Chisda, amarav dam Rav Chisda amarav. How do we know that the Avodas Kochavim of a Jew requires being hidden away? Shne'emar lo sita lecha ashera kol eitz eitzel mizbach. So I'll say you shall not plant an ashera. Eitz by the mizbeach. Ma mizbeach ta'un geniza. Af ashera ta'un geniza. We'll say just like again the mizbeach, as we'll discuss. We'll say if it falls into non-use, the stones have to be hidden away. So to an Asherah Avodah Zara of a Jew also has to be in there. We'll say, by the way, this pasuk is actually very important. This pasuk tells you that you're not allowed to plant trees by the Mizbeach. That's why, I will say, there were no trees on the Harabayis. And that's why, again, unfortunately, when there was a loss of Jewish control over the Harabayis, if you'll notice again, if you look at the pictures of Harabayis now, what will you see? You'll see a lot of trees. And we'll say that was not a landscaping architect called in and decided how to beautify the Harabayis. That was a theological shtach. I'll say that ultimately, again, was a concerted effort to undermine a Jewish claim to Harabayis. Historically, there were never any trees on Harabayis, dafka because of this. Meretz Hashem, the day will come when there will be no longer trees as well. So the Gemara goes back to the Gemara says, Af asher tuna geniza, v'idach, homi b'ayle, l'chid Reish Lakish. Both the other opinion is for Reish Lakish, was Reish Lakish, they dem Reish Lakish. Both listen to this. Is even some agarata today, I will say. It's like about 9 words. So the Amrish Lakish, Kol Hamamid Dayan She'ino Hagun Kilu Nota Shebi. So let's listen to this. if you appoint an unworthy judge, it's as if you have planted an Asherah. Shene'emar, shoftim v'shodshim titin l'cha b'chol sharecha. The pasuk tells me that I have to appoint judges and enforcers in all of my gates. The samich leilo sita l'cha Asherah koletz. And right after that it says, don't plant an Asherah and a tree. So we'll say, so again, the juxtaposition over here between the appointment of judges and the planting of Asherahs tells me that if halacha l'maisa I go ahead and I appoint a bad judge, that's as if I plant an Asherah. Shabbos, the metaphor is very powerful. What is the Asherah? The Asherah represents a negative influence right within the midst of the people. So a person goes ahead and empowers a wrong person on the judiciary, gives a person the ability to go ahead and arbitrate, gives a person the ability to not to arbitrate, to adjudicate law, then again, that's a very dangerous thing for greater society. Amar Rav Ashi says, "Ubamakom talmidei chachamim kilunata eitzel mizbeach." And I will say, if you're living in a place where there are proper talmidei chachamim, and you still appoint the wrong judge, not only is it like planting an Asherah, but what? It's like planting an Asherah by the mizbeach. By Rav Hamnuna. So we'll say Rav Hamnuna asked the following kasha. We'll say we're switching gears just a moment. So now just understand that machlokis Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva has not yet been resolved. Right? So again, and that is a major machlokis. At what point in time does Avoda Zara become asr? So Rabbi Akiva will say the Avoda Zara of an akum becomes asr immediately. The Avoda Zara of a Jew only becomes asr after he worships it. Rabbi Shmuel says the opposite. The Avodah Zara of a Jew becomes asr immediately. The Avodah Zara of an akum becomes asr only after you worship. So both say this is a major machlokes of incredible, overreaching, or overwhelming importance. Because both say what this determines is, are you permitted to have hana from things that were clearly made for idolatry, but not yet used for idolatry? So again, we're not finished with that machlokes. We're just switching gears just a moment. Risech kli la'avodas kochavim mahu. Well, so listen to this. What happens if a person took a utensil and the utensil was broken and he repaired it for the sake of idolatry? So if you take a look at Rashi, you're supposed to say, you see Tosas Tiboile? See that Tosas Tiboile? If you go right across to Rashi over there, so you see Risech Kli. Kli Shenishbar. Well, say if you go ahead and you have a utensil that broke, Vehekish alav bekornus, Ad sheriko v'nispashet v'nismali pigimasa. So we'll say the utensil broke. You took a hammer and you essentially you banged it out. I know I'm not using probably a technical term, but you hit it until you go ahead and you repair the utensil. So we'll say, so now you've repaired a utensil for the sake of Avodah Zara. Now, what's the shayla? What's the status of I should say differently. Risech kli la'avodas kam. You repaired the utensil for the sake of the Avodah Zara. What's the status of the kli? So Gemara says, well, one second. First question, first order of business is avodas kochavim demand. We'll say, what's the first shayla? Who does this belong to? Who does the utensil belong to? If you hold that it's the utensil of an Ovid Kochavim, so bein Rabbi Shmuel, bein Rabbi Kiv Misham Shevelas Kochavim Hein. So we'll say both can Rabbi Shmuel. Remember again, this utensil is a service utensil for Avodah Zara. It is not Avodah Zara itself. So both Rabbi Kiv and Rabbi Shmuel will agree that Umisham Shevodas Kochavim Ein Asurin Ad Sheyavdu. Both Rabbi Kiv and Rabbi Shmuel will say that a service utensil only becomes asr when it's actively used for service. Only when it's actively used for service. Ve'ela avodas kochavim d'Yisrael. They will say, rather, what do you see? It is the avodas kochavim, ultimately again, of the Yisrael. So the Gemara says, well, let's analyze this. Aliba deman. Ilema aliba Rabbi Akiva. So we'll say, according to Rabbi Akiva, hashtahi gufalo misrachati avid misham shemi boy. So we'll say, according to Rabbi Akiva, the avodah zara of a Jew itself, mamish, the idol itself, doesn't become asr until when? Doesn't become asr ultimately until it's actively worshipped. If the idol doesn't become asr until it's worshipped, then what? Certainly the service utensils will not become asr until they're worshipped as well. So ve'ela ali b'Rabbi Shmuel. Rather, it has to be according to Rabbi Shmuel. The Amar Asura Miyad. Rabbi Shmuel also holds that the avodah zara ultimately again of an akum becomes asr immediately. So the Gemara says, "My mishamshin mi mishamshin gaminon." Both say, do we learn out Jewish service utensils, right, from avodah zara service utensils? Mahasam ad sheyavdu avhacha sheyavdu. Just like over there, it's only asr if it's used. So too over here, it's only asr if it's used. O dilma mina gamar. Or I will say, maybe we learn the halachos of the service utensils from the pasal, from the avodah zara itself. Mahi asura miyad, just like the pasal, right? It will say, just like just like the Avoda Zara of the Akum is asr immediately, af mishamsha asr miyad. So to the service utensils will be asr immediately as well. To which the Gemara says, well, my area de kami bayile risach kli. Why are you framing the case as one who repaired a utensil? Ultimately, again, for Avoda Zara. Ti bayile asa. Why don't you go ahead and frame the case as one who made a utensil for Avoda Zara? Why is this a repair case? Why isn't this a making case? All right, a creation case. Rav Hamnuna, so the Gemara says, Tibai le'asa, Rav Hamnuna mishum tuma yishana kamibay. This is actually quite fascinating. Because what Rav Hamnuna also is asking a secondary question as well. Not just about when does a service utensil of Avoda Zara become aser, but he's asking about tuma yishana, old tuma. What does that mean? Look at this next Gemara. This is absolutely amazing. Disnan. Klima tachos, we'll say metal utensils. Forget about Avoda Zara for just a moment now, right? The only thing better than a discussion about Avoda Zara is Tum and Tara, right? And now you got both. You got both in one day. Tum and Tara and Avoda Zara. So listen to this. The Gemara says the Gemara, Klima tachos, we'll say metal utensils. Metal utensils, pshutein and mekablein tomato. We'll say now again, when it comes to a metal utensil, so we'll say there are two different types of utensils. Pshutein and mekablein. Pshutein means a pashut kli, which means a kli without a base kibble. A utensil without a receptacle, and mikableh means a utensil with a receptacle. So with metal utensils, metallic utensils could become asr whether they have a receptacle or not. It's called a kli pashut versus a base kibble. They become tameh. Nishtabru. They will say what happens ultimately again if the utensil breaks. So now the utensil became tameh. We'll say however it became tameh, it doesn't make a difference. Tumas shemer, sheret, tumas meis, whatever it is. Now the utensil breaks. We'll see what happens when the utensil breaks. So taru. And we'll say, interestingly enough, so the utensil becomes tahor, which makes sense because tuma is a function of the object having an identity as a kli. Once the object loses its identity as a kli, it loses its status of tuma as well. So what happens? Now here's the chap. Chazru va'ason. We'll say, let's say, I have my metal utensil. It became tameh. Now it's tameh. It broke. It's tahor. I put it back together. And we'll say, what's the halacha? Yachzuru l'tuma yishana. It reverts back to its previous tameh status. Watch, I told you this was exciting. I wasn't making this up. So it says, look at Rashi just a moment. Rashi says, Chazru l'tumas yishana. If you have the Torah or Shalim in your margin there, it's right across from there. Chazru l'tumas yishana. Let's listen to this. Utzricha tevila. Now the fact that it resumes or it goes back to its original tameh status tells me it has to go to the mikvah. And we'll say now, what is this about Tuma Yishana? Ubi Yitzios HaShabbos. So we'll say the Gemara Masech Shabbos goes, it's Mefarish time Gzeira Shema Yomru Tvila Bas Yoma Ola. So we'll say, listen to this. Under normal circumstances, if your utensil becomes Tameh, so that, let's say Tumas Mei, so the halach is you have to immerse it, but then it requires hair of Shemesh, right? It requires nightfall. Immersion in the mikvah is not enough, it requires nightfall. The concern was as follows. There is a way to instantaneously be metaher a kli. How can you instantaneously purify a utensil? How? Break it. Break it. Now, by the way, smashing it is an extreme, but there are plenty of ways that you can, quote unquote, break a utensil. Or as we'll say, the definition of breakage is rendering it unusable for its given purpose. There are plenty of ways in which you could go ahead and break a utensil relatively easily, quote unquote, so that it loses its identity as utensil becomes tar. So we'll say, I could affect instantaneous tar on my utensil simply by breaking it. What were Chazal concerned about? Chazal were concerned that since you could affect instantaneous tara, any utensil through breakage, through quote unquote breakage, that people may get confused and think that tevila in a mikvah also affects instantaneous tara, also affects instantaneous purification. Therefore, what did Chazal say? They made a gzera. The gzera they made of Osai was, in finishing Rashi, so the Gemara says, Gazra Shem Yomu Tvila Bas Yoma Ola. The Kami Boy, good morning, Mr. Schoenfeld. The Kami Boy, and the Gemara, and therefore the Gemara is asking, Klishin Shtam Shabbat Avodas Kochavim, Varinim Mesech Shabbos, Verik Amar Rabbi Akiva, Misham Shetmein, Shavan Kedei Lataron, Vechazran Verischan Avodas Kocham, Vandayim Mishtam Shubo, Mihadr Tuma Kamaisel. So therefore, again, out of the Gzeira, that one may think that Tvila in a mikvah affects instantaneous tara. So therefore, again, they said that if you go out and you break a utensil and you put it back together, it resumes or it regains its previous tumah. So we'll say, what does this have to do with our conversation? This is what's happening over here. We'll say, here's the shaila. Ki hadra tuma. So we'll say, so now let's go back for just a moment. You have a utensil that was used for avodah zara. Okay, now we'll say, remember again, we already established that when a utensil is used for avodah zara, it requires tuma. What kind of tuma? Is it tumas meis? Is it tumas sheret? So that's a machlokes we saw. Now we'll say what happens. The utensil broke. Now what happens? Rischon. You put it back together. So what's the Gemara Shaila? Does it regain its avodah zara tuma or not? So what's the Shaila? Ki hadra tuma. When we say that a broken utensil, let's put it back together, regains its former tuma. Hanimili l'tuma d'oraisa aval tuma d'rabbanan lo. Do we say that it only regains biblical tuma, but doesn't regain rabbinic tuma? The Rabbi say the notion that something that is used for avodah zara is tamei. Rabbi say, is that biblical or rabbinic? And the answer is it's d'rabbanan. So do we say that again? In this case, it won't regain its tuma? Or no, dilma loshna. Or perhaps we say no, that when the rabbanan imposed this gzira bosai, that if the utensil was tamei, you broke it, and then you put it back together, it regains its tuma. That's both tuma d'oraisa and d'rabbanan. Viti baile shar tumas d'rabbanan. So I understand why you're only asking the shaila by avodah zara. You can ask the shaila by any tumas d'rabbanan. Chada migo chada kami baile. The Gemara is asking one question on the heels of another question. Tuma d'rabbanan mi hadra olo. So we'll say, so shaila number one is, if you have a utensil that was tamei, and then it broke, and then it was put back together, does rabbinic tuma return or not? Meaning everyone agrees biblical tuma returns. Does rabbinic tuma return or not? Olo hadra, or not. Im tim saloma lo hadra. And if you say the rabbinic tuma does not return, tuma da avodas kochav mishum chumer da avodas kochav mishabi rabbanik tuma d'oraisa olo. Will we say that even if normally rabbinic tuma wouldn't return, but maybe what? Maybe tumas avodah zara will. Because even though the tumas avodah zara is what? Is d'rabbanan, because it's avodah zara, it can be treated with the severity of a d'oraisa, and therefore the tumah should return, to which the Gemara answers, teku. We'll have to leave this for Eliyahu Hanavi. So the takeaways from this sugi is, first of all, number one, the way we paskin Abosai is that everyone, both Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel, will agree that service utensils made for avodah zara will only become asar after they are worshipped, after they are used in service, right? After they are used. So it's very important. We saw the machlokes Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shmuel about the idol itself. Is the idol itself asur from the time that it's created, or only after it's worshipped? That's a machlokes. When it comes to service utensils, everyone will agree. Everyone will agree that it only becomes asur after what? After it is used. So both say. So for argument's sake, according to that approach, if you were to go to the avodah zara surplus store and the manufacturer, made some extra whatever, right? Avodah zara tables, right? But they were never used. They're there for the service of it, but they were never used. Technically speaking, one will be permitted to purchase it and use it. That's halacha l'maisa. Whether or not it's appropriate is a different discussion, but on a technical level, one could do it. Both say, number two takeaway is that halacha l'maisa we paskin that when a utensil has tumah and it breaks, the breakage causes it to lose the tumah. If you put it back together, there's a gzera d'rabbanan that tumah returns. That halacha only applies to tumah d'oraisa. Tumah d'rabbanan does not return. The teku is what? What do we do with the tumah of avodah zara? Right? Even though that is a rabbinic tumah, do we treat it like a d'oraisa or not? That's the teku. Says the Gemara. Also listen to this. What happens? What about an offering to an idol, an offering to avodah zara, of food? What is the status ultimately again? What is the status? If one is mevatel that food, so to speak, so does the tumah of avodah zara, is it removed from it or not? Does bittul have the ability to remove its tumah or not? I don't understand why asking about food. Why don't you ask about utensils that were used in the service ultimately again of the avodah zara, or offered up to the avodah zara? So to which the Gemara says, when it comes to utensils, we'll say utensils are obvious. If the utensil is being used as an offering to avodah zara, since the utensil can be purged in the mikvah, so certainly again, if you're mevatel it, so the tumas avodah zara goes away. The shayla is with food. The shayla is if a person offered up food to his avodah zara as an offering, can he be mevatel that offering, thereby removing the tumah from that offering? So I'll say, why don't you ask about an avodah zara? So I'll say, Rashi points out, shal ochlin. What happens if you worshipped food? For example, hamishtachav elepas, a person bows down to a loaf of bread. So we'll say, can a person who worshipped it, can a person go ahead and negate, be mevatel, that avodah zara, thereby removing the tumah, and of course, in addition, making it permitted for consumption, to which the Gemara says, so that's not a kasha. Why not? We'll say Amud Beis. Kevan di isura batil tuma nami betela. We'll say that's obvious. We've already established that a person, or at least an akum, can be mevatel his avodah zara. So we'll say now that we've established that he can be mevatel the avodah zara, then what? You come out to the avodah zara, then of course you could be mevatel the associated tuma of the avodah zara. So in other words, the tumah is a function, Rabbi say, of the idea that this object is an avodah zara object. But lemaiso, if you could be mevatel the idolatrous identity, you could of course be mevatel the tumah as well. Kig makami by this. We'll say, what's the shaila? Takroves avodas chum shel ochlin mai. We'll say the shaila is, what about an offering to avodah zara? Person offered up food to avodah zara. So what's the status of that? Kevan di isure lo batil. So we'll say, do we say that what? Since the isser of takroves, the isra of an offering is never batal. Kid Rav Gidl. Well, remember again, we saw the shita of Rav Gidl just a few days ago. Rav Gidl has an interesting shita where he holds that takroves ain't no batal. He holds, I will say, that as much as an akum can negate an idol, you can't negate the offerings. Once the offerings are offered, that's it. They are forever asur. So do we say? Do we say then? And there's obviously only through the lens of Rav Gidl. That just like Rav Gidl holds that ultimately, again, the takrovis, the idolatrous identity, or I should say, the idolatrous offering identity cannot be negated. Therefore, tuma nami no batla. Therefore, the tuma could also not be negated. O dilma iser da'oraisa lo batil. Tuma derabanan batil. Or Rabbi say, do we say the iser da'oraisa, which is the act of offering something to an idol, that can't be batil, but the tuma which is derabanan can be batil. To which the Gemara says, Teku. Rav Yossi ben Shom Merabi. Kalim sheshimshu b'han bebeis chanyo. Mahor. Both say, this is amazing. This is amazing. So we'll say, what about the utensils used in the shul, right, in the shtibel of chanyo? We'll say, what's the shtibel? What's the shul of chanyo? We'll say, watch this. Last wide line in Rashi on the top, bebeis chanyo. Mefarish b'shmaitin b'asraiset demenachos. Chanyo b'no shel Shimon HaTzadik. We'll say, listen to this. Chanyo was the son of Shimon HaTzadik, right? You know Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik, Chayo Mishiyari, Anshe Beisek and Sagdol, right? Shimon HaTzadik was one of the last remaining, one of the last remaining members of Anshe and Sagdol. So you can go to the grave of Shimon HaTzadik, right? He's, I don't know that you should go there alone without armed escort. It's right in East Yerushalayim. Also, as you're driving, let's say, from the old city to Ramat Eshkol. So I'll say, so again, the grave of Shimon HaTzadik is mamish right, not far from the border police station. You know, right on the right. So I don't know that you should go there, but again, it's right there. So mamish should go to the grave of Shimon HaTzadik. So I'll say, Shimon HaTzadik had a son. Let's say, he had a son Chanyo. Shebarach leMitzrayim. He ran away to Egypt. Why did he run away to Egypt? Mipnei Echav. So we'll say, listen to this. Shimon HaTzadik had two sons. He appointed his older son. Well, first he appointed Chanyo to be the Kohen Gadol. Chanyo deferred to his older brother. Then I will say, ultimately, again, he was upset that he passed up on the opportunity for greatness. So what did he do? He ran away to Egypt. What did he do in Egypt? Ubana Sham Mizbeach. He built an altar. And I will say, he didn't just build an altar. Chanyo built a Beis Hamikdash in Egypt. He effectively built a replica of the, much smaller, but a replica of the Beis Hamikdash in Egypt, and he became the Kohen Gadol there. So we'll say, so here's what's fascinating. Upligi hasam, so we'll say, listen to this. So there's an interesting discussion. It's not pashut that it was Avodah Zara. Meaning, there's a machlokes, as we're going to in just a moment. Was it Avodah Zara, or was he worshipping HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So we'll say, so here's the shaila. Utensils used in the shul, in the Beis Hamikdash of Chanyo, which was built in Egypt, Ma'u she'yishtamesh bohen bebeis Hamikdash. We'll say, listen to this. Can I take those utensils and use them in the Beis Hamikdash proper? V'kami baile. So we'll say, so what's the shaila? Aliba demand amar Beis Chanyo la Beis Avodas Kochavim hi. So we'll say, so remember again, this obviously is only a kasha, according to the opinion who holds that the shul of Chanyo, the Beis Hamikdash of Chanyo, was not a Beis Avodah Zara. This nan Kohanim sheshimshu bebeis Chanyo lo yishamshu b'mikdash b'Yerushalayim. Both say, because we have a Mishnah that says the Kohanim who served, and by the way, Chanyo recruited quite an all-star team, right? I mean, he was offering. Really, how did he recruit an all-star team? Right? He offered money, right? So he got Kohanim. He did get Kohanim to come and to join him. So I'll say, what's the shayla? The shayla over here is what happens if I'm a Kohen? Kohen served in the shul of Chanyo, and now he wants to come back to the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim. Can we accept him back? So Kohanim sheshim shul Beis Chanyo lo yisham shul Hamikdash Yerushalayim. No, once a Kohen served in the house of worship of Chanyo, we do not allow him to serve in the Beis Hamikdash again. Ve'eno tzarich lomar ledavar acher. So we'll say, and all the more so if a Kohen served Avoda Zara, of course we don't let him back into the Beis Hamikdash. So we'll say, so what do you see from here? So what do you see from here? You see from here, by the way, that Kohanim who served in Beis Chanyo are treated differently than the Kohanim who served Avoda Zara. So I'll say, you see that there is an opinion who holds that Beis Chanyo was not Avoda Zara. It's a machlokes. So according to the opinion who holds that Chanyo wasn't worshiping idolatry, can utensils which were used in the house of worship of Chanyo, can they be used in the Beis Hamikdash? Now we know Kohanim who served in Beis Chanyo cannot go back and serve in the Beis Hamikdash. So do we say, the Gemara says, so Echad Kohanim, so the Gemara says, Kohanim who dekansiu Rabbanim mishum b'nei deyaninu. So we'll say, I understand the rabbis knas the Kohanim, because the Kohanim made a choice to go serve in a foreign place, so therefore they can't come back to the Beis Hamikdash. Aval kelim lo. But I will say, when it comes to utensils, so even though Kohanim can't come back and serve in the Beis Hamikdash, maybe that's just a knas on people, on Kohanim. But kelim which were used, perhaps the kelim could be used in the Beis Hamikdash proper. O dilmaloshna. Or do we say no? The same way that Kohanim can't serve in the Beis Hamikdash after serving in Beis Chanyo, so kelim cannot be used either. Amar le asurim. Asurin heim. So we said no, the utensils ultimately again are asur. Umikra biadenu. And I have a pasuk to support this, v'shachachnuhu. But I will say, what happens? So he says, but I forgot the pasuk. I forgot the pasuk. So I will say again, remember, this is Rabbi Yossi ben Shol asking from Rabbi. So Rabbi says, I know that if utensils were used in the Beis Hamikdash of Chanyo, they cannot be used again in the Beis Hamikdash. And same way Kohanim who served in the Beis Hamikdash of Chanyo cannot come back and serve in the Beis Hamikdash. I know there's a pasuk that supports this, but I can't for the life of me remember the pasuk. Esvei, so we'll say, so he raised the kasha. We'll say, by the way, yeah, we'll discuss, the story's not over. Esvei, kala kelim asher is niach hamelech achaz b'malchuso b'malo heichano v'ikdasha. So let's listen to this. So the Gemara says, the Gemara quotes the pasuk from Divrei Hayomim and says all of the utensils used by King Achaz, right, during his monarchy, heichano v'ikdashno. We'll say literally we're prepared and we're sanctified. Now we'll say King Achaz was an Ovid Avodah Zara. Right? Remember again, Achaz is the father of Chizkiyahu. Chizkiyahu was a great tzaddik who literally rededicated the people to the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but he had to undo the incredible and unspeakable damage of his father. So all the utensils that were used by Achaz, Hechanu v'ikdashnu. My love, Hechanu dat belinu, hikdashnu da'akdishinu. Doesn't that mean that Hechanu means they immersed it in the mikvah? Hikdashanu means they re-anointed it with Shemen HaMishcha. So we'll say at this point in time, so Rebbe says, Amrle Baruch Atala Shamayim. Blessed are you. Right? Blessed. Remember, this is Rebbe speaking to Rabbi Yossi ben Shol. Blessed are you. Shechzartali Avedasi. You gave me back my lost touch. Remember again, Rebbe said, I know that I have a pasuk to support this. I can't remember the pasuk. Rabbi Yossi ben Shol asked the kasha from this pasuk. Now, as we're going to see, he interpreted it wrongly. But Rebbe says, thank you so much for reminding me of the pasuk that I've forgotten, because this is the pasuk. Heichanu, what does it mean that they prepared them? Right? Sheganzum, they hid them away. Vikdashnu, shekdashnu achirim tachteyem. That they commissioned the utensils, that you see from here, the utensils used by Achaz for Avodah Zara, were not reused. They were hidden away. Gniza. So what did they do when Chizkiyahu came to power? They got totally new utensils. So we'll say, so again, so Rebbe was using this as a raya to say that essentially utensils are both used in anything other than Beis Hamikdash service. Simply what? Cannot be reused in the Beis Hamikdash. So too, even utensils used in Beis Chanyo cannot be used in the Beis Hamikdash again. So the Gemara says, this is actually a fascinating discussion. Mizrachis Tzivonis. In the northeast corner of the Beis Hamikdash, there was a chamber. What was put in that chamber? Gonzu be beis chashmonais avnei hamizbeach sheshaktu anshi yavan. I will say the Chashmonaim. I will say this is actually amazing. When the Chashmonaim came back, this is after the miracle of Chana. I will say this is amazing. When they came back to the Beis Hamikdash, so everybody focuses again on the menorah, but they came back and they found the mizbeach was there. The outer altar was there. The problem is they saw that it was used by the Yevanim for idolatrous sacrifice. So what did they do? It's amazing. They broke apart the mizbeach. They broke apart the mizbeach and they went ahead and they hid the stones, meaning gniza. They put the stones in a chamber, in a northeast chamber. This is called Lishkas Ha'ish, in the fire chamber. They put it there. They put it in the northeast chamber, and they hid away the stones there. What happens? Because the Greeks had used this mizbeach, had used our mizbeach for the service of the Avoda Zara. Amar Papa, Hasam Kra Ashkach V'Darish. The Chashmonaim found the pasuk and Medash and Tichsev Uba'u Ba Pritzim V'Chilaluha. That the pritzim, I will say literally, the Ovdi Avoda Zara came in and literally they profaned it. So Amri Hechi Navid. So the Chashmonaim said, what should we do with the mizbeach? Nisberinu. So I'll say, if we say we'll just break it apart and put it back together, that's not going to work. Why? Because Avanim Shlemos Amrachmana. Torah says the mizbeach has to be made of what? Whole stones. Ninasrinhu. So if we just chisel down the stones, that doesn't work. Why? Lo Sanif Alayim Barzel Amrachmana. Torah says you have to use stones, but you can't use iron in the creation of those stones. The amai lit barinu v'lishkalunu l'nafshayu. So we'll say, why not just go ahead and break the stones? And I will say, essentially, once the Gentiles used it, they profaned it. Once they profaned it, then what? It has no kedusha. Once it has no kedusha, then what? Let the Chashmonaim break apart the stones and use it to build their houses or something. Meaning, use it for whatever you want. Milo Amar Avoshia, Bikshu Lignos, Kol Kasev Ezav Shava'olah, Mishum Kasma Devadava, Sheyerushalayim. I will say this is amazing. That at one point in time they wanted to go ahead and say that Jews can't use any gold and silver. Why? Because of the gold and silver that was taken from the treasuries of Yerushalayim. So we'll say there was a concern that if a Jew were to go ahead and use gold and silver, they might be inadvertently using the gold and silver ultimately of the Beis Hamikdash, of Hagdish. We'll say this is after the temple treasury was raided. So the Gemara says, but one second, Yerushalayim have Yerubah the Alma. Yerushalayim, the majority of the world that you have to be concerned, the gold and silver you're going to find is going to be from Yerushalayim. Elo Amar Abaye, Bikshu Lignos Dinara Hadriana Toraina Shifa. They wanted to go ahead and was saying what? They wanted to say that Jews can't use certain Hadrianic coins. Because I will say during the times of the Emperor Hadrian or the Toraina Shifa, these are specific kinds of coins that they knew were minted from the gold and silver of Yerushalayim. Mipnei Tiva Sheyerushalayim. Ad Shematzu Lo Mikra Min HaTorah, until they found the pasuk of that's seemingly permitted. What's the pasuk? Shumuter Uba'u Ba Pritzim V'Chalua. We'll say, what's the pasuk? The pasuk is that when the Pritzim, the Ovdei Avoda Zara, come in and use our stuff, by definition they go out and they remove the kedusha from it. So if they took the gold and silver from the temple treasury, they profaned that gold and silver. It was no longer kadosh. Same idea over here. When the Greeks came in, I will say, and used our mizbeach in the Beis Hamikdash for idolatrous service, what did they do to it? They profaned it. Meaning it no longer has kedusha. If that's the case again, I will say the Chashmonaim come in, break apart the stones, hide it away. Not when I say hide it, I mean put it away in the chamber of the Beis Hamikdash. But if the Yevanim used it ultimately again for Avodah Zarah, then what I will say? It should become profane. If it's profane, then what? You can use it for whatever you want. Just like the gold and silver. Hasam lo ishtamshu ba lagavoah, hacha kevan d'ishtamshu lagavoah, lav orach ara l'ishtamushe bahu adyota. But in this case over here, even on a technical level, once the mizbeach was used for idolatry, technically speaking, the kedusha evaporates. Once the kedusha evaporates, you can even use it for what? You can even use it for regular mundane items. The Gemara says it's inappropriate. Why is it inappropriate? Since halacha l'maisa, it was used for the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu once, it would be inappropriate ultimately to use it for mundane service afterwards. Therefore, when the Chashmonaim come back, they break apart the mizbeach, they put away the stones in one of the chambers for Geniza. But I will say, to answer the original question was utensils used in Beis Chanyo. Can you use them in the Beis Hamikdash? And now it turns out that Rebbe remembers not only the answer, but the pasuk where he gleaned the answer from. The answer to that is no. Once utensils ultimately again were used in Beis Chanyo, they will not be permitted to be used in the Beis Hamikdash itself.